Welcome to the deep dive. If you are one of the millions of people who has invested, time, money, and a whole lot of emotional energy into owning an espresso machine, you know the daily struggle.
Oh, I know well.
You stand there, you're watching the clock, waiting for that beautiful, syrupy stream of coffee to emerge, only to take a sip and discover it tastes, well, like battery acid, sour metallic.
Or the complete opposite, a mouthful of just bitter, burnt ash.
Exactly. It is so frustrating, it's confusing, and it makes you question every expensive decision you've ever made about coffee gear.
It's an incredibly common scenario, and I think it really highlights a fundamental misunderstanding of what we call dialing in. Dialing in isn't just guesswork.
No.
It's the daily, precise, and very technical pursuit of finding the optimal recipe for a given batch of coffee for today.
Right. For today, because it changes.
It always changes. It means ensuring that you extract the exact right amount of soluble flavor compounds from the grounds using the right amount of water in the right amount of time. And without that daily precision, you are essentially, you're letting random variables dictate your morning sandy. Espresso is a game of millimeters and tenths of grams. It demands precision.
And that is exactly why we're here. We are going to try and turn that daily frustration into a rewarding science. The mission of this deep dive is to unpack the core variables. We're talking dose, yield, and grind, and provide you with practical barista-certified tips and the crucial scientific context that turns those inconsistent gushers into repeatable, delicious shots.
We want to demystify the process for you.
Absolutely. This focused look at technical coffee mastery is brought to you in association with procaffeinate.co.uk. Now let's get brewing and master the art of extraction. Okay, let's unpack this. Before we even load a single bean into the grinder, we have to talk about the foundational toolkit. Espresso, it's really just physics under high pressure, isn't it?
That's a great way to put it.
So if we are aiming for consistency, precision equipment is, it's non-negotiable. What does a learner absolutely need to start the dialing in process successfully?
You are absolutely correct. Precision is paramount. The first and most critical pieces of equipment are accurate digital scales. And when I say accurate, I mean scales that measure to 1/10 of a gram. That's 0.1 G accuracy.
Okay, so not just my regular kitchen scale.
No, definitely not. You need a way to measure the dry coffee dose before extraction, and you need a way to measure your wet yield, the liquid espresso coming out. So that often means 2 sets of scales, unless your machine has one built in.
Okay, let me push back on that a little bit. Why the fanaticism over 0.1 grams? If I'm using, say, 18 grams, surely 18.2 grams or 17.8 grams won't make that much difference, will it?
It makes a massive, massive difference, especially when you think about the extraction process. If you change your dose by even half a gram, you are fundamentally altering the resistance the high-pressure water encounters.
So the density of the coffee puck changes?
Exactly. A change of just 0.4 grams in your dose is often equivalent to making a pretty significant adjustment on your grinder. So if you don't measure the input consistently, you have this huge unknown variable affecting every single shot you pull.
Right.
And we always measure by weight in grams, not volume in milliliters or ounces. The reason is that the density of extracted espresso, it changes based on concentration, temperature, and especially the volume of crema. Weight is the only constant metric we have.
That settles the measurement tools. That makes perfect sense. Now let's talk about the physical mechanics of actually preparing the coffee puck. What else is critical for ensuring that puck integrity?
Okay, so that brings us to tamping and the baskets themselves. First, you need a flat tamper that fits tightly into your portafilter basket. The goal is to create a perfectly even, perfectly level coffee puck.
No tilted tamping.
None. That uniformity is absolutely critical because it dictates how the water is going to flow through that coffee bed.
Yeah.
Any tilt or any unevenness guarantees, and I mean guarantees, the water will find a path of least resistance.
And that leads to channeling?
Immediate channeling. And what that does is it creates under-extraction in the areas where the water just gushes through and over-extraction where the flow is restricted. You get both problems in the same cup.
And Austin, people think a tamper is just a tamper, but you mentioned the basket. The quality of the basket matters too, right? Why should someone invest in a precision basket?
Yeah, that's a great point. Precision baskets, you might see them called VST or IMS baskets. They're manufactured to a much, much higher standard. The consistency of the holes, the size of the holes, it's all much more uniform compared to the standard baskets that often come with a machine.
And what does that do for the shot?
It ensures the water is pushed through the coffee bed as uniformly as possible. It also, as you said, can prevent your tamper from getting stuck and disrupting the puck, but more importantly, it promotes consistent flow dynamics right from the start. It helps stop those tiny little channels, the micro-channeling, that can happen on a much smaller scale, even with perfect tamping.
So, okay, we've got our scales, we've got our precision basket, we've prepared the puck perfectly, but the shot still tastes off. How do we visually diagnose what's going wrong inside that basket?
For that, you need the bottomless, or as some people call it, the naked portafilter. It is an absolutely essential diagnostic tool.
I love my naked portafilter.
It's fantastic. It removes the spouts, so it allows you to see the bottom of the basket directly. When you pull a shot, what you're looking for is a perfectly centralized, beautiful, cone-shaped emergence of liquid.
Like a little beehive.
Exactly. If you see erratic streams or sprays or little jets of water coming out unevenly, that's channeling. The high-pressure water has located a flaw in your puck preparation, maybe a loose spot, a tiny crack, or a gap near the edge, and it's just streaming through, causing massive under-extraction in that specific area.
I remember the first time I used one, it was humbling.
Oh, it is for everyone.
It looked less like espresso extraction and more like a water fight, but that feedback loop is invaluable. So, now that we have the equipment, let's define the operational framework. I call them the 3 pillars of extraction: dose, yield, and brew time.
Those are the operational variables, and they are completely intertwined. The dose is your input, the dry weight. The yield is your output, the wet weight. And the brew time is just the speed of the process.
And if you manipulate any one of those,
You fundamentally change the flavor outcome. And this brings us to, I think, the single most critical rule for success. The golden rule of dialing in.
Yeah.
You must only adjust one parameter at a time when you are seeking perfection.
I cannot stress this rule enough for beginners. If you change your dose and your grind and your yield all at the same time, you've introduced 3 variables and you have absolutely no idea what caused the resulting flavor change.
None.
You've essentially created a science experiment where you can't isolate the cause.
That's precisely it. You instantly lose track of what you're doing. For consistency, the best practice is to lock in your dose and your yield ratio first. Then you use the grind setting to control the speed of the shot, the brew time. That way, when you taste the shot, you know exactly which adjustment needs to be made next.
Before we dive into those parameters in detail, let's quickly define the 2 flavor pitfalls that we are constantly trying to navigate away from. What are the undeniable signs of under-extraction?
Okay, under-extraction. It means not enough of the desirable compounds have been pulled from the coffee into the water. The taste indicators are highly specific. It's typically intensely sour. Think of a very acidic, unripe piece of fruit, or, sometimes surprisingly, you get salty notes.
Salty, that's an odd one.
It is, but those are the acids and the inorganic salts that dissolve first in the extraction process. The espresso often lacks any real sweetness. It has a quick, thin finish on your tongue, and it can feel almost metallic. It's not necessarily weak, but it's chemically imbalanced.
And what happens when we go too far in the other direction, the other extreme?
That's over-extraction. It means we've dissolved too much material, including all the nasty acrid compounds that extract last. This results in a taste that is just overwhelmingly dry, bitter, burnt, or ashy smoky. Crucially, the mouthfeel often feels hollow, and the finish is very, very drying. It just coats your tongue unpleasantly.
So we're looking for that sweet spot in the middle.
We're aiming for the perfect balance between the early extracting acids and salts and the late extracting bitter compounds. That's the goal.
So we're armed with our scales, our naked portafilter, and our golden rule. Let's start with parameter 1. Dose the dry weight of the coffee grounds? We established this should be locked in early, but why is the dose amount so important, and what factors dictate the range we should use?
The dose is the foundation. It's the input. And while it definitely impacts resistance to the water, its primary role is to set the foundation for your ratio and to ensure you have the right mechanical clearance inside the machine. Baristas, we generally use between 18 and 21 grams for a standard double espresso. If you are serious about specialty coffee, you absolutely must measure this precisely to 0.1 G every single time. No exceptions.
Okay, so I've heard talk about basket size and something called headspace. Can you walk us through how that dictates the optimal dose?
Absolutely. Factor 1 is the size of your portafilter basket. Baskets are rated, let's say, for 18 grams, but they usually allow for a range, maybe 16 to 20 grams. The key mechanical constraint here is the headspace.
And headspace is what exactly?
It's the space between the top of your tamped coffee puck and the shower screen of the espresso machine. If you dose too high, the coffee puck expands when it absorbs water, and it might actually hit the shower screen before extraction even begins.
What's the consequence of the puck hitting the shower screen?
It's catastrophic for extraction. I'm not exaggerating. If the puck touches the screen, it creates a small hole or a depression right in the center. Or it can loosen the coffee around the edges. When that high-pressure water hits that compromised spot, you get immediate channeling right in the center, leading to a massive loss of consistency.
Is there a simple, practical tip for the listener to check if their dose is too high for their specific machine and basket?
There is, and it's a barista favorite. It's called the nickel test. It's brilliant. You dose your coffee, you tamp it normally, and then you place a clean U.S. nickel or a similar small coin gently on top of the puck.
Okay.
Then you lock the portafilter into the machine, but, this is important, you do not pull the shot. Immediately unlock and remove the portafilter. If that nickel has left a visible, deep impression in the coffee puck, your dose is too high. You're hitting the screen.
So you need to reduce the dose.
Exactly. You need to reduce your dose by about 0.5 to 1 gram and try again until the nickel only leaves a very light, barely visible mark. That's how you know you have sufficient headspace for a proper pre-infusion.
That is a fantastic, actionable tip. I love that. Now, how does the age of the bean complicate things? Does that affect dose?
It does. That's factor 2, coffee age. As soon as beans are roasted, they start releasing CO2, a process we call degassing. This process slows down over time. So freshly roasted beans, say within 3 to 7 days, they have a lot of gas, which actually helps create resistance to the water flow.
So they fight back a little bit.
They do. But as the beans age, say past 2 weeks, they lose that CO2 and they also lose moisture. They become slightly less dense and they offer less resistance. This is why shots tend to run incrementally faster over the course of a week with the same bag of beans.
So what's the fix?
To counteract this natural decay and flow restriction, you'll probably need to increase your dose size slightly, maybe by just 0.2 grams every few days, to maintain that resistance and keep your target brew time consistent.
And the third factor is the roast level itself, which affects how porous the bean is, right?
Yes. Factor 3, roast level. Lighter roasts are denser and structurally harder than darker roasts. This means they're fundamentally less soluble. To successfully extract flavor from a light roast, you generally want to ease the extraction.
So a lower dose.
Often, yes. Lower doses, typically between 17 and 19 grams, often work better because it gives the water less material to penetrate, which eases the total pressure requirement and allows for a better flow rate.
And for dark roast?
A darker roast is the opposite. It's more porous, it's brittle, it's highly soluble, and it extracts very, very easily. A slightly higher dose might be necessary here just to maintain enough resistance and avoid a shot that runs way too fast and just tastes bitter and ashy.
So once we've settled on a dose based on our basket, our nickel test, and our bean, let's say we land on 18.5 grams, we lock it in. But if we must adjust the dose later for some troubleshooting, what's the rule of thumb?
Keep the changes tiny. If you absolutely have to adjust the dose to help dial in, use really small increments. No more than 0.2 or maybe 0.5 grams at a time. These seemingly minute changes have a huge geometric impact on the bed depth and the flow resistance. But the goal really is to set the dose and keep it fixed. It just simplifies controlling the other parameters so much, especially the grain.
Okay, that makes sense. Now we can transition to parameter 2, yield. This is the wet weight of the extracted espresso measured in grams. This is where we control the concentration of the final drink.
Exactly. Yield is crucial because it dictates the level of extraction and the resulting concentration. The principle is actually quite simple. The higher the yield, which means more water is passed through the grounds, the higher the extraction level you've achieved. But at the same time, the less concentrated the espresso will be.
It's a trade-off.
It's a constant, unavoidable trade-off.
And this is where the all-important ratio comes in, connecting our dose, our input, to our yield, our output.
Precisely. Professional coffee bodies and just general barista consensus strongly recommend the 1.2 ratio as the foundational starting point. If you start with 18 grams in, you aim for 36 grams out.
And why 1.2? Why is that the magic number?
This specific ratio, sometimes called a normal, is really considered the sweet spot. It allows enough water contact time to dissolve the pleasant sugars and the nice organic acids, which results in those subtle and nuanced flavors, while still maintaining sufficient body and concentration. It's just a great balanced place to start.
But the best part of dialing in is adjusting that ratio to hit different flavor profiles. How do we manipulate that output weight to change the taste?
We adjust the concentration. So if you pull a shorter ratio, like a 1.1.5, which would be 18 grams in, 27 grams out, you are creating a more concentrated espresso. That's often called a double ristretto.
And what does that taste like?
Well, because less water has passed through, you have a higher concentration, but you potentially have a lower overall extraction yield. So flavor-wise, ristrettos are generally heavier, more viscous, and they tend to emphasize the richer, sometimes chocolatey notes, but they might lack the brighter, more delicate finish of a longer shot.
And if we need to force more complexity out of the grounds, especially with those light roasts, we go longer.
Correct. A longer ratio, something like a 1.2.5, which would be 18 grams in to 45 grams out, or even up to 1.3 for extremely light, hard-to-extract roasts, allows for maximum flavor extraction. You are essentially forcing the water to pull out those late-stage, high-flavor compounds.
So the body will be thinner.
Yes, the resulting shot will be less concentrated and thinner in body, but you often gain a lot in sweetness and overall complexity. This is frequently necessary for those really dense, difficult light roasts.
I see the distinction you're making there. We need a set ratio when we start for the sake of consistency, but in practice, baristas are always tweaking this slightly, aren't they?
Oh, constantly. In a cafe environment, the pursuit of flavor balance trumps strict numbers every single time. If a rigid 1.2 ratio gives you a shot that's a little bit harsh or aggressively acidic, an experienced barista might decide to run it just a little bit longer, say, changing the ratio to 1.2.2 to pull out a little more sweetness and tame that acidity.
So the numbers are the guide, not the law.
Exactly. Ratios are critical guidelines for learning, but they are not absolute commandments once your palate is trained. We use the yield to manage how much of the coffee compounds we are actually including in the final cup. Now for parameter 3, brew time. This is the indicator, not the control. This is so important. It is the metric that tells you the result of your dose, your yield, and most crucially, your grind size. It's the last variable to focus on in terms of adjustment, but it tells the entire story of the shot.
What's the target range for that time? We see different numbers cited in different sources. It can be a bit confusing.
It can be. While the total acceptable range is generally somewhere between 22 to 40 seconds, most specialty coffee shops are aiming for a much narrower sweet spot. It's often cited as 25 to 32 seconds, and that's from the moment the pump is engaged.
And that window is where the magic happens.
That window reliably provides the necessary contact time for optimum flavor dissolution. It's just a time-tested range that works for most coffees.
And how does that time directly translate to flavor in the cup?
It's a direct correlation to solubility kinetics. It's a bit sciencey, but basically shorter time, say a 20-second shot for that 1.2 ratio, mean less contact with water. The result is more acidic, thinner espresso.
And longer.
Longer time, say 38 seconds, mean prolonged contact. You get results that are sweeter because you have more time to dissolve the sugars, but also highly prone to introducing those over-extracted dry, bitter compounds. If your shot takes 45 seconds, the bitterness is almost certainly going to dominate.
Let's nail down the timing nuance. This is a point of debate online. Should the timer start when the pump engages, or when the first drop of coffee actually hits the cup?
Okay, for consistency and for full process measurement, starting the timer when the pump is engaged is the professional standard. The reason is that extraction begins the moment hot water hits those grounds.
Right, not when it leaves the basket.
Exactly. However, that initial phase is a great diagnostic tool. We look for the drop time, which is the moment the first concentrated drops hit your cup. This should be somewhere between 5 and 7 seconds.
And what does that tell us?
If it's over 7 seconds, your grind is probably too fine and the machine is struggling against too much resistance. If it's under 5 seconds, the grind is too coarse and the resistance is inadequate. This helps you course correct the grind before you waste a full dose of coffee.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because the brew time is just a reading on a clock. The primary control lever we use to hit that target time is, of course, the grind size.
The grinder is truly the engine of the entire espresso process. There's no overstating its importance. It's what restricts or allows the flow of water. We often use the rocks and sand analogy because it's just so highly visual.
Go on.
If your grind is coarse, like rocks, the gaps between the particles are large. Water finds it super easy to pass through, resulting in a faster shot and, of course, severe under-extraction.
And fine.
If your grind is fine, like sand, the gaps are minimal. This forces the water to trickle through very slowly. The result is a slower shot and potential over-extraction.
So the troubleshooting based on time seems pretty simple then. If the time is too fast, grind finer. If the time is too slow, grind coarser. But how much of a change should the listener make on their grinder?
That is the trickiest part, because grind adjustment is geometric, not linear. Small changes have massive consequences on the flow rate. If your shot is running at, say, 18 seconds, you need a significant adjustment. But if it's running at 23 seconds, you only need a micro adjustment.
So it's about feel and experience.
It is, and the crucial tip is this. 2 or 3 small fractional adjustments are far more efficient and manageable than one huge adjustment that overshoots the target and requires you to start all over again. Always make small moves, pull a test shot, taste it, and then adjust again.
And what's the grinder's quirk that we absolutely must remember every single time we touch that adjustment collar? You have to talk about the purge.
The purge is absolutely mandatory for accurate dialing in, and it's where most beginners fail. Grinders retain about 15 to 20 grams of the previous setting's grounds, often stuck in the burr chamber and the chute.
So if I adjust my grinder from coarse to fine,
Then you immediately pull your test dose. You are grinding a mix of old coarse particles and new fine particles. The result is just a messy, inconsistent extraction that tells you nothing. You must purge, which means grinding and discarding 2 or 3 full doses of coffee after every single adjustment you make. This ensures the next shot you test is based purely on the new, consistent grind size.
that is a foundational habit of any successful barista. It feels wasteful, but it saves coffee in the long run. Now let's talk about why we can't just set the grind and walk away. What external factors mean we have to constantly adjust this?
Even if you are in a perfect climate-controlled environment, you need to adjust daily. First, there's coffee aging, which we touched on earlier. As those beans degas and lose their CO2 resistance over the course of a week, the shot will run incrementally faster. So you're constantly chasing this loss of resistance by adjusting the grind slightly finer every day to maintain that 28-second target.
Okay, that makes sense. But what about temperature? That plays a huge, often unseen role, especially in a busy cafe, right?
Indeed. This is all driven by thermodynamics. As the grinder burrs spin constantly, friction causes them to heat up. This temperature fluctuation, the change in heat on the burrs, affects the shattering pattern of the beams and the resulting particle distribution. Hot burrs tend to produce slightly different particle distributions than cold burrs do.
So a grinder that's been running all morning will behave differently.
Exactly. It will subtly alter the flow rate.
Yeah.
In a commercial setting, you might need to make minor micro adjustments to the fineness throughout the day just to counteract that temperature drift.
And finally, ambient conditions. You're telling me the weather affects my coffee.
It absolutely does. Humidity and ambient temperature greatly affect the moisture content of the coffee grounds themselves. If the air is very humid, the grounds absorb moisture, which causes them to swell slightly.
And that's swelling.
It increases resistance. It can potentially choke the shot, meaning you suddenly need to grind coarser. If the air is very dry, the grounds are more brittle, less resistant, and the shot will run faster, requiring a finer adjustment. You have to be observant and prepared to adjust throughout the day for perfect consistency.
So we've successfully hit our target weight in our target time. We've got 18 grams in, 36 grams out, and it took 28 seconds. By the numbers, this should be perfect. But now comes the moment of truth. Tasting and diagnosing what's actually happening chemically inside the cup.
This is where we need to talk about the scientific measurement known as extraction yield. It sounds complicated, but the concept is simple. It's the percentage by mass of the coffee grounds that have been dissolved and ended up in the espresso.
Okay, give me an example.
For a simple calculation, if you start with 20 grams of dry coffee and 4 grams of dissolved material ends up in your cup, you have a 20% extraction yield.
Simple enough. And what is the magic number we are aiming for with that yield?
Traditionally, the flavor preference studies, the ones popularized by the SCAA, suggested an ideal range of 18% to 22% yield. That range ensures a really good balance between the sour acids, which dominate the early phases of extraction, and the bitter compounds, which dominate the late phases.
But that's not the whole story in modern coffee, is it?
No, it's not. In modern specialty coffee, there's a big push to aim higher, sometimes up to 25%, because certain light roasts only unlock their complex floral and fruit notes at these higher extraction yields. So the optimum extraction is really a moving target. It's dictated by the specific bean and ultimately by your personal preference.
Before we diagnose, we need to ensure we are tasting correctly. This is a skill in itself. How do we approach the tasting process critically?
First, you must stir the espresso vigorously. Espresso extracts in layers, and that crema that settles on top is generally the most bitter and often the most distracting component of the shot. Stirring incorporates everything.
And then what?
Then you take 2 or more sips. The first sip should really be viewed as just shocking your palate. The intensity can overwhelm your initial sensory input. The second sip provides a much truer, more accurate assessment of the flavor profile. And please, never ever just slurp the crema off the top. It will completely mislead your diagnosis.
And a practical note for the home barista, if we're testing recipes for, say, a cappuccino or a latte, we have to test the espresso with milk too.
Absolutely. The chemical interaction is significant. The sugars and the fats in milk drastically alter your perception of the espresso base. Milk acts as a buffer. It often heightens the sweetness while simultaneously softening or even masking those highly acidic or sharp bitter notes.
So a shot that's a bit too sharp on its own might be perfect in milk.
Exactly. An espresso that tastes slightly too acidic when consumed solo might be perfectly balanced and delicious when paired with a few ounces of steamed milk. You have to test for the final application.
Now for the flavor compass, the detailed summary of diagnosis based purely on what you're tasting. Let's start with that unpleasant, under-extracted flavor and what action to take.
Okay. If the shot is intensely sour, salty, lacks sweetness, and has a quick metallic finish on the tongue, it is under-extracted. You haven't dissolved enough of the desirable compounds. Your primary actions should be one of two things.
What are they?
One, increase your yield. Run the shot 2 or 3 grams longer to dissolve more of the sugars. Or 2, grind finer. That's the most powerful lever you have to increase the overall extraction efficiency and contact time.
And what if we've gone too far and we're deep into, as you said, the ashtray territory?
If the espresso is overwhelmingly bitter, dry, brunt, hollow, or smoky ashy, it is over-extracted. You've dissolved all those late-stage acrid compounds like tannins and bitter melanoidins. To pull back that extraction, you should, again, do one of two things.
Let me guess. Decrease yield or grind coarser?
Exactly right. 1, decrease the yield by pulling the shot 2 to 4 grams shorter. Be a bit cautious here not to make huge ratio shifts. Or 2, grind coarser, which will drastically reduce the contact time between the water and the grounds. The goal is always to dial out the extremes to find that balance.
And the ultimate sign of success, when do we stop tweaking?
Sweetness, a refreshing acidity, a clean mouthfeel, and a lasting pleasant finish. Those are the hallmarks of a well-extracted, balanced espresso. If you hit that point, you lock in those exact parameters immediately and you write them down in your journal.
To truly train the palate and internalize this whole extraction spectrum, we have to spend some serious time on the salami shot exercise. This is a lot of fun, and it provides an immediate, visceral lesson in flavor chemistry.
The salami shot is the perfect training method for your palate. It helps you understand the time-based evolution of flavor. The procedure is simple. You pull a single espresso shot, but you swap the receiving cup every 10 seconds, creating 3 distinct segments.
Let's break down the sensory profile of each of those segments, starting with the first 10 seconds. What's in that first cup?
Cup 1, early extraction. This first segment is intensely chemical. It is dominated by the compounds that dissolve immediately, high-acidity organic acids and inorganic salts. It tastes aggressively sour, very salty, sometimes metallic, and it is also incredibly thick and viscous, almost syrupy, because the initial concentration of dissolved material is highest here.
So if my regular shot tastes like that,
You are severely under-extracting, no question.
then you move into the core extraction phase, the second cup.
Cup 2, mid-extraction. This is the 10 to 20 second segment, and this is the gold standard. This is where the majority of the desirable sugars and organic compounds are dissolving. This segment is balanced, rich, sweet, often tasting of caramel or toasted nuts, and it's typically the most enjoyable part of the entire process. It will have less body than the first cup, but the complexity and the sweetness peak right here.
And finally, the tail end, 20 seconds and beyond, in cup 3.
Cup 3, late extraction. This final segment tastes watery, thin, and aggressively dry. It contains the compounds that require the most time and energy to dissolve, primarily things like cellulose, bitter melanoidins, and astringent polyphenols or tannins. It's bitter, woody, and very drying on the tongue. It looks and tastes diluted and unpleasant.
So how does the listener apply this now to their daily shot? How do they use this information?
You use this 3-part spectrum to diagnose your current standard shot. If your normal 30-second shot tastes heavily like what was in cup 1, you know you need significantly more extraction. That means a finer grind or a longer ratio. If your shot tastes heavily like what was in cup 3, you need less extraction, a coarser grind, or a shorter ratio. This exercise teaches you that you are literally tasting time, and your goal is to maximize the content of cup 2 while minimizing the contribution of cup 1 and cup 3. Once you understand the mechanics of extraction, you then have to adjust your recipe based on the raw material, the coffee bean itself. The characteristics of the bean absolutely dictate your starting temperature, your dose, and your ratio.
Let's detail how the roast level affects the process. We've touched on it, but let's go a bit deeper.
Okay, light roasts are harder to extract. The beans are denser, the cell structure is more intact, and the flavor compounds are just less soluble. To successfully extract these complex flavors, you often need to use higher brewing temperatures, think 90 degrees C or more, and employ longer ratios, sometimes 1.2, 0.5, up to a 1.3.
So you need more power and more time.
Exactly. The extended contact time and the higher temperature are required to physically penetrate that dense structure. You will almost always need a slightly finer grind than you would for a dark roast to compensate for this difficulty of extraction. And you must expect and embrace a realistic, pleasant acidity.
And for the classic Italian-style dark roasts, what's the approach there?
Dark roasts have been roasted longer, which makes the beans porous, brittle, and highly soluble. They release their compounds very, very easily, meaning they extract fast. To control this quick extraction and prevent immediate bitterness, you can actually handle lower brewing temperatures, often best between 80 and 85 degrees Celsius.
And the ratio?
Dark roasts often taste best when they're pulled quite short, often 1.1.5 or even down to a 1.1 ratio. This creates that thick, syrupy, intense shot that avoids excessive dissolution of those late-stage bitter compounds. And because they extract so easily, they usually require a slightly coarser grind compared to their lighter counterparts just to maintain the desired flow rate.
Beyond the roast, we also have to consider the processing method, washed versus natural, for example. Does that significantly change the recipe?
It does, because processing affects the structural integrity of the bean itself. Heavier or more intense processing methods, like a natural process where the fruit remains on the bean during drying, or some of these complex fermentations we're seeing now, they tend to create more porous, less dense beans.
So they extract more easily.
They extract more easily and quicker than standard washed coffees, which are generally denser and cleaner. And this is critical. Even if the roast is light, a funky, natural process coffee might benefit from a slightly shorter ratio or a coarser grind than you would typically use for a very dense, clean-washed coffee of the same roast level. It all comes back down to the solubility of that specific bean.
And we must emphasize again the importance of the bean's age. Too fresh is bad, too old is difficult, there's a sweet spot.
Freshness requires patience. Beans need to rest for about a week after roasting to release enough CO2 for stable pressure and extraction. For very dense light roasts, you might need to wait even longer, maybe 2 to 4 weeks, for optimal flavor development.
And if they're too old?
If the beans are too old, say 2 months past the roast date, they struggle to build pressure, they don't produce good crema, and the resulting shot often just tastes thin and lifeless. At that point, you can try grinding finer or increasing the dose just to regain some slow restriction, but often the flavor potential is simply gone.
So we've optimized the recipe based on the bean. Now we have to talk about mastering consistency. Every expert I've ever talked to emphasizes turning human variables into constants. What are the key actions here?
Consistency begins with puck prep. Your goal is an evenly distributed, homogeneous bed of coffee in the portafilter before you even think about tamping. Clumping in the grounds is a massive issue. I strongly recommend the WDT, that's the Weiss distribution technique, which uses a fine needle tool to break up clumps and level the grounds.
Like a little rake for your coffee?
A tiny little rake. It sounds fussy, but clumps create density gradients, and those gradients are the birthplace of channeling. The WDT is the single best way to prevent that micro-channeling that starts below the surface where you can't see it.
Once it's beautifully distributed, we tamp. Does the amount of pressure really matter, or is it just about being level?
Both matter, but consistent pressure is key. Use the same consistent firm pressure every single time. Tamping must be firm enough to fully restrict the flow and generate the required 6 to 9 bars of pressure. Many beginners worry about over-tamping, but
That's not really a thing, is it?
not really. The flow resistance is primarily determined by the fineness of your grind, not the maximum pressure you apply, provided you are firm enough to fully compress the puck. The levelness of the tamp is far, far more important than achieving some mythical 30 pounds of pressure.
And finally, the administrative side of consistency. The boring but essential stuff.
Yes. The scales must measure to 0.1 G increments, no less. And you need a method for knowledge retention. Keep a journal of your parameters, whether it's digital or on paper. Every time you achieve a successful, balanced, delicious dial-in, record the dose, the yield, the time, your grind setting, and the flavor outcome. This allows you to rapidly build knowledge and dramatically speeds up the process the next time you use that specific bean.
So you're not starting from scratch every single morning.
You're not starting from scratch, you have a reference point.
Now we come to a variable that I think many enthusiasts overlook. They relegate it to an afterthought, but it is actually one of the most powerful levers we have. Water chemistry. The water is the solvent carrying all the flavor.
Water is arguably the single largest variable you will encounter, and it's this invisible foundation of your espresso. If you've mastered the dose, the yield, and the grind, the water is the next frontier. We need to look at total dissolved solids, or TDS, and the mineral content.
Can you just use any filtered water?
Well, using highly purified water, like distilled water, is actually bad. It tastes hollow, and paradoxically, it extracts flavor compounds too aggressively because it's seeking saturation. On the other hand, using very hard water is bad because it causes scale buildup in your expensive machine, and its high mineral content can inhibit proper flavor extraction.
So what's the target for the chemical composition of the water?
The general recommended range for specialty coffee brewing is a TDS of between 100 and 150 parts per million. More importantly, the bicarbonate content, which acts as a flavor buffer, should be managed. High bicarbonate levels can flatten all that beautiful acidity in your coffee. We want minerals, but the right kind of minerals.
I remember reading that calcium and magnesium play specific roles in flavor enhancement. Is that true?
Absolutely. Magnesium and calcium ions are highly effective at bonding with and extracting flavor compounds, especially those related to sweetness and body. Specifically, calcium often enhances the textural mouthfeel of the shot, lending it a thicker, richer texture. If you have water that is low in these specific minerals, you might find your otherwise perfectly dialed-in shot just tastes a bit thin or muted. Water optimization is critical for achieving that final 5% of flavor potential.
Let's bring the other crucial water variable into the conversation, temperature. Provided the listener's machine allows for precise control, how should they use temperature as a final flavor lever?
Temperature directly impacts the speed of dissolution. It is one of the most powerful tools for dialing in the finish of a difficult bean. If you are consistently hitting your time and ratio, but the shot tastes slightly sour, which points to under-extracted compounds.
You raise the temperature.
Right. Increasing the temperature by 1 or 2 degrees Celsius will speed up the dissolution, driving the extraction yield higher, which often successfully reduces that perceived sourness. Hotter water extracts faster.
And for the opposite problem, for taming bitterness.
If you are consistently getting a shot that is slightly bitter or dry, meaning you have over-extracted compounds, reducing the temperature by a degree or two will slow the dissolution rate. This makes the water less effective at pulling out those late-stage acrid compounds, thus taming the bitterness and dryness without necessarily requiring a major grind adjustment. Remember the rules. Dense, light roasts need heat, 90 degrees Celsius plus. Brittle, dark roasts need to be tamed, down to 80-85 degrees Celsius.
This all really boils down to the fact that espresso is a living, organic system and it requires constant, thoughtful adjustment.
It is. Once you understand that every single factor, from the temperature of the grinder burrs to the chemical composition of your water, affects the flow dynamics and the solubility, you realize that dialing in is a dynamic art based on scientific precision. Consistency in your puck prep, meticulous measurement, and making one change at a time. Those are the keys to repeatable success. #ChagOutTragGouch.
This has been a true deep dive into the complex mechanics of perfect espresso. We started with the foundational equipment, those 0.1 gram scales, the nickel test for your dose, and the bottomless portafilter for immediate diagnosis.
All essential tools.
We hammered home the golden rule of changing only one variable at a time. Then we mastered the pillars, locking in the dose, setting the yield via the ratio, and using brew time as the result controlled by the power of the grind. We even used the salami shot to train our palates. Espresso is complex, but the pursuit of consistency is what separates the frustrating shot from the flawless, delicious one.
And if you take away only one guiding principle from this entire deep dive, remember that the numbers, the time, the ratio, the temperature, they are just guides. Your taste is the ultimate referee. Your aim is always for the trio of balance, complexity, and sweetness in every single shot you pull. Once you achieve that perfect balance, you know you successfully extracted the best of the bean, regardless of what the timer says.
Now, for a final provocative thought, something for you to mull over once you've mastered the grind and the ratio. If your technique is perfect and your beans are fresh, consider this. The biggest hurdle to achieving flawless consistency might not be the coffee, but the pressure profile of your machine itself.
That's a good one. Think about machines that offer flow control or pressure profiling. We've discussed the goal of achieving 9 bars of pressure during extraction, but how the machine builds that pressure can drastically change the flavor. Does your machine ramp up the pressure slowly to allow the puck to fully saturate during pre-infusion, or does it just hit 9 bars immediately?
Like a sledgehammer.
Exactly. Consider how managing that pressure curve Allowing a gentle saturation before hitting full force might be the last, most advanced frontier of flavor adjustment. It could be what enables you to extract those dense, light roasts perfectly without channeling.
Master the basics first, and then explore the mechanical engineering of your machine. We hope this deep dive has given you the confidence to turn frustration into reward. Thank you for joining us for this session on technical coffee mastery.
It's a pleasure.
And a final reminder that this focused look at dialing in was brought to you in association with procaffeinate.co.uk. Visit them for further exploration of coffee gear and beans to start your dial-in journey. We'll see you next time.